Well, good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is Tim Voss. I'm with the Southwest Grain Collaborative, which is a small nonprofit working in partnership with the NMSU Cropping Systems Research Program. And I'm glad to be back. I was here a while ago to talk about regenerative farming, and now um, we're really going to extend that conversation with the topic of soil enhancement, or another way to say it would be building and maintaining soil health. So here's the outline for what I'm going to talk about this evening. An introduction emphasizing how essential soil organic matter is. That's the heart of the matter, really, when it comes to soil health and soil enhancement. Section 1, then we're going to look beneath the surface. We're going to try to look at the root zone and the soil profile with some imagery. Because it's just hard to get our imagination into it. Even those of us that work as farmers and gardeners and ranchers, we don't really think about what's beneath the surface of the soil that much. It's hard to picture it. So we're going to try to get a look at that. Then we're going to talk about types of cover crops. Cover cropping, as I said previously in that last presentation, is the best way to build soil. And we're going to talk then about managing biomass or managing soil organic matter, and get a little bit into the question of tillage, conventional tillage, conservation tillage, or no-till, what the pros and cons are around those. And then we'll wrap it up by kind of reviewing the regenerative farming priorities, how regenerative farming prioritizes soil health. So to the intro, then, we're really talking about how essential soil organic matter is to soil health. It's the core of the matter. So for all soils, organic matter is essential for biological processes and plant nutrient supply. I'm going to define what soil organic matter is in some detail in a moment. When plants and animals die, they become part of the soil organic matter. So we're talking about the cycles of life and death, which go on the farm in a very visible way. And farming and ranching, we really deal with the essential matters of life and death, and it's really the ultimate and original recycling process. So we don't lose anything. If we do it right, we don't lose any of those resources. We put them back into the soil and create new fertility. Soil organisms break down and consume organic residues from the plant world, let's say, or from other organisms, which are digested and reduced to fine water-soluble particles, which then become available for plant uptake for the next crop. Okay, so this slide, I think I showed a version of this during my last talk too. This quote: "Feed the soil." This idea, it's really the first precept or the first rule of organic farming. And what it really means is feed the soil microbes that live in the rhizosphere, the root zone. And I'm going to show you a picture of what that looks like in a minute. And those microbes in turn will then provide nutrients to the following crops. So again, there's this cycling of nutrients and resources going on. The only way to do this, to feed the soil, to feed the microbes, is to supply continuous and abundant amounts of biomass or organic matter, which comes from crop plant residue and animal manures. We'll talk about animal manures a little bit later, and about composting, but that's not the main point of this talk, but it's definitely an important dimension of soil health. The next sort of corollary to the feed the soil rule is put in more biomass than you harvest and export. Put in more biomass than you harvest and export. That's a huge challenge. We have that as an ideal that we strive for or aspire to. It's kind of hard to do, but you really got to work at it, and that's the point about building and maintaining soil health. You really have to make a deliberate effort at it. So soil microorganisms feed on and break down organic matter, metabolizing it into nutrients that are then made available for uptake by plant roots. This process of metabolizing and breaking down organic matter is called mineralization. Just for your information, it's not really that important to know that, but it's interesting. And this is really interesting, this last bullet point. Total biomass of soil microbiota is directly related to available nitrogen and other nutrients for plant growth and biomass production. So we're going to think about that and return to that idea. Total biomass of soil microbiota. So, and I'm especially talking about here bacteria and fungi, especially mycorrhizal fungi, which we'll have some imagery of. The more abundance and diversity of those microorganisms you have in your soil, the better fertility you have. So here's a little schematic of this cycling of resources. You start at the top with biomass. That's the above ground plant world, and you can picture that, as in the natural wild world, you can picture that as like tall grass prairie over in Kansas, or you can picture it, here in the high desert with, sagebrush, or you can picture a forest. You can picture, swampland and sedges and things like that. All that is above ground biomass. And so on the farm, that's your garden, that's your vegetables, that's your corn. If you're farming fields, larger fields, that could be your alfalfa. That's above ground biomass. That could be a grain field of wheat or barley. It could be a field of beans. It could be squashes, pumpkins. It's all above ground biomass. When that crop, now just focusing on the farm, when that crop dies or is harvested, you're going to take off a certain amount of biomass, which is the point of farming, to take that biomass off and use it to feed yourself or to feed your livestock or to sell to make a living. The rest of the residue there then is reincorporated into the soil. And we'll talk about that, how we go about that. So then these yellow arrows are sort of indicating the energy transfer from the above ground biomass, which, by the way, is that energy comes from the sun. And then through photosynthesis, we have the plant world. And then we move that biomass into the soil, and it starts to become soil organic matter. It starts to break down into smaller and smaller pieces. It gets shredded by various decomposing organisms, whether they're visible like ants and beetles and worms, or whether it's the invisible world of microbes like bacteria and fungi. So that's the next thing. The third one around there is the microbiome itself. And really, it's like the soil organic matter and the microbiome are kind of interacting. One doesn't come before the other. They're both at the same time. And that's the real dynamic. That's the real engine that breaks down biomass into soil organic matter, into mineralizing it into small enough particles to turn it into nutrients over there, moving to the left. And then eventually those nutrients are taken up by the next crop of plants, whatever's planted, whatever comes along. I hope that kind of gives a good sense of the big picture there. Okay, now we're going to take a look below the surface. So just picturing the soil microbiome in the root zone. This is sort of what the soil is made up of. There are three types of particles, generally speaking, in the soil: sand, which is the largest; silt, which is the mid-size; and clay, which is very small particles. That makes up about 45% of the soil. Then there's air and water, which 25% each makes up the rest of the soil. So there's a lot of air and water. 50% of the soil is air and water. And then only 5% of the total soil is made up of soil organic matter, roughly on average 5%. In the high Colorado Plateau around here, it could be 2% or 1.5%, just out in open wild country. So it's a real job to try to increase the percent of soil organic matter here in this type of climate with these types of original soils. And then just mentioning that plant roots, root exudates, bacteria, fungi are all the things that create soil structure, that create the possibility of aeration and improved water holding capacity and increased fertility. All those things interacting together, plant roots, root exudates, bacteria, fungi, are the things that create what we call tilth or texture or sponginess, or basically a plant-friendly habitat. So again, soil organic matter is at the center of this process. Here's a pie chart of what I just described: 25% air, 25% water, 45% mineral. That's the original base of the soil, whether it's sand, silt, or clay. And there's that 5% organic matter, that little slice. But the most crucial part of it, really. So here's a look at the particle sizes. At the top, you see sand, which is 0.05 millimeters to 2 millimeters, and depending on the various conditions. So it's quite large. Sand we can see with our naked eye. We can pick this up. Now, if we were in person, we'd be out in a field somewhere with a spade and a spading fork, dig it into the soil a little bit, and we could discern what type of soil we're standing on. And maybe someday, as Jesse and I were talking about earlier, we might have a chance to do that in person. So then the middle picture there is silt, and you can see it's quite a bit smaller. And then really the clay, it's way smaller than that depiction. You cannot discern it with the naked eye. It's so tiny. And if you have a lot of clay, that means it presses together and sort of becomes compacted together, and it's very difficult to get the air and the water percolating through it, which one of the remedies, the main remedy is adding more soil organic matter. So this is probably a review for everybody, but I think it's good to go back and check this out and just get these pictures in our imagination. So here's a look at a soil profile or a soil horizon. So really, you got the plant, the above ground plant world there, what I was referring to as biomass. And then, the first 2 inches is really where the detritus settles at first, right? And they call that organic in this schematic, but the organic matter is going to go much deeper than that. But really, the root zone and the area of active microbial life and the metabolism of the soil that I was just describing happens in the top 12 inches of the soil, mostly. And especially when we think of vegetables, vegetable roots don't go down much deeper than 12 inches, and sometimes they're much shallower than that. When we start to get into grain crops or alfalfa or perennial crops, then we're going to be going deeper to that subsoil B, down 30 inches. And actually, I mean, some types of grasses will penetrate much further than that, and that's why they're so good as a cover crop, is because they're putting in a lot of root biomass, so under the ground biomass, as above, so below, as they say. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But they're also they're breaking up compacted soil or a hard pan, the roots of a grass cover crop or just a grass crop, and adding organic matter deeper and drawing nutrients, micronutrients, up from the lower layers of the soil. So that gives you a sense of what we're looking at. We never see this in real life. I mean, you can take a shovel and dig a hole and dig down and start to see that. And if you wanted to do that in your field, you could dig it like a a 1 meter square hole or something like that, and not even that big really, and dig down a few inches and start to see what it looks like. It's very interesting to do that in real time on the ground. So tilth is the term that we use. We're trying to create good tilth by our soil husbandry practices. Tilth means creating a soil texture that is really friendly, really plant friendly, and really is good habitat for soil roots, does not impede soil roots, and supports plenty of air and water holding capacity, and also is an excellent space for microorganisms to live in and interact with the plant root world. So you sort of have this aggregated soil, these clusters of particles on the left there. So you have good infiltration of water. If that soil is not aggregated that way, if it's not in good tilth, it can be that the particles are not holding together, and therefore they're becoming compacted and pressed together. This can happen for various reasons, and including too much tillage and too much heavy machinery. And then you get a compacted surface there, and the water does not penetrate the soil, and it runs off. Okay, so here's a look at soil texture, what I just described. Somebody took a spade and sliced into the soil and got enough space around it so they could take this picture. So you see the above ground plant world, and then you see the root zone there, and you can sort of see some roots. And what's really interesting is to see the aggregate structure of the soil here, and also the dark color of the soil, which shows fertility. It shows organic matter is very strongly present in this root zone, and the way the soil particles are hanging together, you have lots of pockets, small pockets, large pockets, intermediate pockets, for the roots to penetrate and for the air and water to be held and circulating, because the roots have to breathe just like the above ground plant parts have to breathe, the stems and the leaves and so forth. It all has to breathe. And so if it's compacted, then your roots are stunted. And then if your roots are stunted, they're not taking up nutrients, and then your above ground crop is stunted. So that's just one glimpse of the soil profile right there. Here's a look at, you see a trowel there, and you see that soil's been loosened by that trowel, and you see how it sort of crumbles and falls apart, but still hangs together in clumps, showing that porousness, but also that structure, that integrity, that holding together, which gives basically provides the habitat for the below ground organisms. Here's another look at crumble structure. A person has picked up a little handful of soil, and you can see again that dark color, and you can see you can see some larger clumps and some smaller ones, but you can see how it breaks down. It could break down easily if you ran your thumb over that. You could open it up even more. And if you squeezed it, there's a thing called the squeeze test. Again, if we were together in person, depending on how much moisture there is and what the proportions are of salt, silt, and clay and organic matter, if you squeeze that, it would become like a dirt clod, right? And if it's got a lot of clay in it, it's just going to stick together like a dirt clod, and you're not going to be able to really break it back up. But if it's just the right tilth, you'll squeeze it together, it'll hold together, but then you can just gently touch it with your finger and it'll break back into these clusters and this crumbly texture. Here's another example of the same thing, and you see some roots in there. So it's really interesting to get down close to your soil and with a trowel or a short-handled spade or just a regular long-handled shovel, whatever you have for digging, and just start to get to know your soil a little bit like this. And as you go through your farming process year by year, season by season, you'll see subtle changes as you follow the practices of adding soil organic matter and building soil organic matter. It'll evolve in front of your eyes, very slowly in front of your eyes. Okay, so here's the what we call the rhizosphere, the root zone. That's a fancy word which I like, rhizosphere, but it just means root zone. And you can see that these are 3 pine seedlings, I believe, just barely getting started in life, right? And you can see the soil above where the roots have started to grow. You can see that texture we're thinking about. But here's the interesting thing: you see what looks like a mass of roots. The reddish colored strands are actually the root of the pine. The white, thinner, thread-like network of filaments there, that's all mycorrhizal fungi. I don't actually have that word written out, and I don't think I could spell it off the top of my head. It's MYCORRHYZ something or other. I'll have to update you on the spelling. But anyway, that's mycorrhizal fungi. And what that organism is doing is transferring nutrients from the soil and the soil microorganisms, the bacteria that is mineralizing the soil organic matter. It's working symbiotically between the soil and the roots of those pine seedlings to bring extra nutrients to those plants. And this is occurring in soils all over the world, all over the planet, all the time. There are millions and billions of miles of mycorrhizal fungi beneath our feet, whether it's prairie or forest or farm fields or gardens. This is a huge, huge benefit, what we call ecosystem services. So when you have a really healthy soil, that's the type of activity that you're fostering in that soil that feeds, actually brings nutrients to the plant. And also the plant, by the way, every plant is putting out what they call root exudates, putting out fluids from its roots into the soil to attract the microbial world to it, to attract the fungi and attract the bacteria and create its own little microbiome in its in its little zone there where it lives. If those pine trees weren't there, those pine seedlings weren't there, that mycorrhizal fungi wouldn't be there either, or much less of it, let's say. So it's quite a symbiotic, amazing thing that's going on. Okay, here's another picture. I'm not sure what plants these are, but you can see they're well-developed roots, but you can also see in between them that lateral network of white thread-like filaments. That's the mycorrhizal fungi. So it's packed. The soil is packed with life. And it's the farmer's first job really is to take care of that life in the soil, just like you take care of your livestock or your crops. Okay, here's a photo, a recent photo that we took. This is from a farm that's participating in our cover cropping trials, and she planted bolita beans as well, not necessarily for cover crops, but we're also growing bolita beans as a cash crop, as a food crop. Many of you are probably familiar with those. They're smaller than pintos and very delicious. But these are the roots. So beans are a legume, which means they fix nitrogen. They're the only type of plant that does that. They take nitrogen from the air, they metabolize it, and then they deposit that nitrogen in little nodules, those little round white tan colored balls on the roots there. Those are pockets of nitrogen that are being brought into the soil by this legume, which is why legume cover crops or legumes in general are so valuable for soil fertility. Nitrogen being like the key nutrient for plant growth, right? So it's pretty amazing. And these plants, they weren't even that big yet, but they're already fixing nitrogen. So that's a really, really positive sign when you can see that. Just getting into looking at roots a little bit here. This is a rye plant that's been pulled up, and you can see that the above ground biomass and the below ground biomass is about equal. But in actuality, just the process of digging up those roots, you lose a lot, or if you're pulling them up, you lose a lot of roots that just stay down there in the ground. So there's actually a lot more roots that were part of this plant that were left behind. But so this is the kind of the core root ball right here. That's a few young rye plants, planted as a cover crop. That's I can tell that just because they're planted so closely together. Although when you're growing rye for grain or hay, you still plant it pretty close, but it's usually planted extra close for a cover crop. But it's just interesting to see the above ground and the below ground biomass here. This is another legume root picture of root nodulation. You can look at the plant, the above ground plant. The leaves there are bean leaves. I don't know what kind of bean that is, but you can see those round light colored nodules all along the taproot and the side roots. So that's fixing nitrogen in the soil. Hugely beneficial. And then you get a chance to see that soil profile again. Okay, here's a picture, not a very good picture of wheat roots. You can see most of the wheat roots got left behind. There'd be a lot more hanging down there like a long beard, but just a few strands are left. But somebody was trying to get a shot of the roots, but that didn't work out too well. Now here's soybeans. This is actually not one of the pictures that I've taken or my colleagues or the farmers we work with have taken. This is just something that someone shared with me, where they grow a lot of soybeans is over in Nebraska, soybeans and corn, right? So again, you can see, it's a little harder to see. They're a little smaller in this picture, but you can see those root nodules. I mean, to me, that's practically a miracle to see those. And what they do is pretty miraculous. They bring that nutrient right out of the atmosphere, right into the soil. Okay, now this is an image. I just wanted you to see, these are various grasses and forbs that you'd find in the native prairie. And I just wanted you to have a chance to look at the different types of root formation that they have, the different types of root architecture, if you will, and how they spread out and how deep they go. So some of these plants could be putting down 2, 3, 4 feet of roots. Especially if they're there a long time, the perennials will establish their roots, and they'll be if nobody comes along to plow them under or mess with them, they're just going to keep developing these massive root systems. And that's why, the prairies of the Middle West were so fertile, because these plants were growing there undisturbed for so long. But just to get a sense of the root zone, and try to imagine that in your own horticultural or agricultural activities, what's going on under your feet? So now I'm going to talk about cover crops because cover crops are the key thing, the most efficient way to supply biomass and soil organic matter to your soil, to build your soil. The fastest and most efficient and also most economical way, I think, is to plant cover crops. There are other ways, like I said, compost is another one, but it takes tons and tons of compost to equal the amount of biomass that you can get from one planting of cover crops. And if you do several cycles of cover crops and keep doing it throughout your farming career, you're going to see enormous benefits from it. So here, this is part of the trials that we're doing. That we're trying. My outfit is trying to develop drought-tolerant cover crops adapted to New Mexico and the broader Southwest, and eventually we're going to be doing seed increases and saving seed, and hopefully scaling up to where we're able to grow enough seed to distribute to farmers and gardeners like you and ranchers, and have these locally grown crops. Right now, all the cover crops that we use in our crop rotations have to come from a long distance away. I've talked about this before. Shipping costs are higher almost than the seed, and the seed is expensive in itself. And also, not to mention, the carbon footprint of all the trucking and the fuels that are used to move things around. If we could grow these types of things here in our region, that would be a huge step forward and a huge benefit to the entire farming community, agricultural community. So these are cowpeas, which is kind of a vining legume. This was planted in Los Lunas, just south of Albuquerque. And this picture was taken maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was over there. And this is grown with not as much water as a normal crop would be grown with, because we're trying to check the drought tolerance on it. And as everybody knows, this was one of the hottest, driest summers, really tough summer. I hope everybody's doing well and enjoying the cooler weather, by the way. But so this is a candidate for something that we would grow and start to save seed from, because look how well it's doing. And it's got a lot of biomass above ground, and it's pretty much shading out and outcompeting or smothering the weeds that would otherwise be growing there. So this has not been weeded. You see some weeds there in the back, but for the most part, this field is pretty weed free because this cowpea outcompeted the weed population. Here's a picture of foxtail millet planted over at Ladue, which is near Mora, towards the east side of the Sangre de Cristos. And so this is foxtail millet. It's a very old kind of millet, one of the original kinds of millets. And it's a food. It's a grain. It's a human food. That grain is harvested and it's delicious. It's not as common as pearl millet, which is more common. You see that in the store. You can buy that and cook with it like you would with rice or barley. But it's also a great forage crop, as the cowpea, by the way. These crops can build your soil and be available for cutting for hay or for grazing your livestock, or cutting hay to export to livestock or to sell if people are interested in selling it. But this is another cover crop that we're looking at, cover forage crop. And you can see it's doing really well. It was already, this is a few weeks ago, before that other picture. And it's not that tall yet, but it's already got seed heads on it. And this is in a situation, you can see the drip lines in the bed next to it there, where the farmer, Kristen, she was being very careful about not giving too much water, but just trying to keep the plants alive. And you can still see in the hot weather with no monsoon, that foxtail millet has done really well. Okay, this is millet. I believe this is pearl millet. This is up in Cortez. So just north of Farmington, in Colorado. And these were planted in strips, so you're not really seeing the smother crop effect. But it was really hot and a really sandy soil, but you can still see the aggregate structure there. And they were really going with a lot less water, not very much water at all. And they had the same conditions that we did all over the place. Very, very little, if any, rain this summer. So that was also just, back in September recently. Here's a little further north in western Colorado. Other barley trials. So barley is a great cover crop. People use it for that express purpose. They also use it, as you know, it can be grown for hay, and it can be grown for grain. And we are growing barley in our project for the grain, for human food, and we're growing and selling barley to some bakeries and restaurants along in New Mexico, mainly along the Rio Grande, places like Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Taos. But this is an interesting picture of you can see some different color there, different types of barley next to each other, and just seeing how they're doing, and they're obviously doing really well. So if you thought of this as a cover crop to feed the soil, you would be eventually reincorporating that into the ground and adding all that biomass, which would be a huge boost to the soil fertility and the soil health of that field. And barley is more of a cool weather type crop. It's grown in the fall or the spring more as a cover crop. It's not necessarily a hot middle of the summer type crop, but I'm not sure what time of year this was, but it's an example of one of the things we're working with, and it's a classic cover crop. Now here's what we've been talking about are the two main types of cover crops: legumes and grasses. And oftentimes they're planted together. I'm going to show you a picture of that in a second. But there's also forbs that are used for cover crop. So forbs are not legumes and they're not grasses. Forbs means a broadleaf sort of shrubby plant. And here in this case, this is buckwheat, just at its flowering stage. Buckwheat is an excellent summer cover crop. It grows really fast. So you can get a cover crop in between other crops and get it in and out in 4 to 6 weeks. Also, when it starts to flower like this, it's a great attractor for pollinators, for bees and other insects. Other beneficial insects love this. So it's a habitat for good insects. You can grow buckwheat all the way to seed, and it's considered a cereal. It's good to eat. People eat it for breakfast. I know some people are making it into porridge. But so that's buckwheat. It's a great quick summer cover crop. Lots of biomass. It grows really fast. You can see how thick it is. So here's a classic multi-species blended cover crop of legumes and grasses. So clover, rye, vetch, barley. This is something that it's a classic combination. So vetch is a legume and clover is a legume. Those red flowers, that's crimson clover right there. I recognize the flower. And the reason I recognize it is because I used to plant it a lot in California. In this actual type of combination right here, with barley and rye and vetch, and oftentimes with bell beans as well. These are things that on the coast of California where I used to live and farm. It's a rain. It used to be anyway a classic rainy pattern in the winter, so you could get a cover crop in and not have to water it because the rains would take care of it, and you'd be building your soil over the winter. A little harder to do here in the higher elevation when it's really cold. It's hard to do a winter cover crop. You need to get it in earlier, like now or before now. And a lot of times that's why a spring or a fall quick cover crop is good, or a summer cover crop if you have the land to rotate. So anyway, these are some types of cover crops. So now I really want to talk about managing biomass. So you think about all those cover crops and how do you deal with them? I mean, I'm not really going to go into the preparation of the land and the sowing process and everything. We could go into this. I should have said this at the beginning. I'm running through a lot of information here, and really, like I've taught classes at college where it's a 16-week semester, say, and I might spend 6 weeks on this subject matter. And the rest of, and this is for a general organic production, organic farming class. So there's a lot of details that I'm skimming over right now, and I hope that this is whetting your appetite to learn more. But by no means are we covering all the nuances and all the angles on this subject matter right now. But this is really important in terms of maintaining soil health, building and maintaining soil health, because we're going to talk about tillage now, which has become a little bit of a controversial subject. And I'm just stating up front, there is not a one-size-fits-all answer to the question of tillage. Sometimes now you have people really pushing no-till. And that's kind of a reaction to large-scale industrial farming where there's been excessive tilling and excessively large machines making too many passes on the land and leaving the soil bare and pulverized without soil structure, which has led to erosion and soil degradation. And I mean, if you've heard of the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, that's a classic example of too much tillage and the wrong kind of tillage. So I wanted to talk about tillage because of it's an integral part of understanding how to relate to your soil. So just a little list here: types of equipment. When you have a lot of above ground biomass, a big crop, and if it's a cover crop, you're not necessarily going to go in and try to just incorporate it first thing. You want to take it down. You want to kill it first, knock it down. Usually you're going to do that with a mower, either a roof mower or what they call a brush hog, or a flail mower or a sickle bar, which relates to cutting for hay. And then you're going to do, if you're going to do tillage, there's several ways to do it: mold board, disc, spading machine, rotavator, chisel plow. We're going to look at these, and then we'll talk a little bit about no-till. So here's an old, not that old really, because it's got the hydraulics, but here's a good shot of a mold board plow in action, and you see the implement is cutting into the soil, cutting rather deeply into the soil, and then flipping the soil completely over. So it looks like you're going through a grass field there, and you leave behind you upturned soil. So the root zone has been completely inverted and exposed to the air and exposed to the sun. And that is really not a good thing. That in fact, in my view, and in this time in history, that's pretty much a cardinal sin. Now, you may be surprised to hear me say that, because I know a lot of people still use a moldboard plow. And I mean, I know some farmers that are still using that form of tillage, that form of primary cultivation, but it's pretty much obsolete. And for the reasons that I've just been talking about, and I hope I'm not going too fast with all this, but when we're talking about the root zone, we're talking about a living habitat, a living ecology. And when you do a move like this on it, you're basically you're really disturbing that and destroying that ecology. And that's a real loss of resources. And then that soil begins to lose its structure. The microbes die from exposure to the heat. And all that organic matter basically evaporates and withers away, oxidizes. If we were together in the same room or talking in the field, I'm sure there might be questions or comments about this, and we could talk about this in a more nuanced way, and maybe sometime we can. But I'm just saying, from my point of view, and there's better ways to do it. Here's another look at the moldboard plow. The dust is kind of obscuring the implements there, but you see basically inverted soil, so all the above ground, it does a good job of incorporating the above ground plant material, but it leaves you lose all the below ground biomass and the living organisms that are processing soil organic matter and turning it into nutrients. Here's what I was looking at this picture again. I identified it as a flail mower, but now I'm wondering if it's a rotavator. But I think it's a flail mower because it's not really cutting into the soil. A flail mower there's a drum underneath that cover that's rotating with many little hammers or hatchets attached to it on hinges, and it rotates at a high rate of speed, and it really cuts the crop down and grinds it up into small pieces, really small pieces. So it makes a mulch that's leaving behind that you can kind of see. It's a really efficient way to take down a cover crop when you're or if let's say you've taken grain off of a field, but you still have the stubble, or a cornfield, same thing. Or you've taken hay, but you still have the stubble. Then you can come through and use the flail mower to chop the rest of it up fine, so that then it's going to break down when you incorporate it in the soil, or if you just leave it on the surface of the soil, it's going to break down faster, which makes then the nutrients available sooner. So it's just a little bit more efficient way, if that makes sense. Here's the standard implement for most of the farmers that I know, and for myself over the years, using a disc. The advantage of a disc is that you can move fairly quickly over the field. And depending on the size of the disc, you do cut into the soil. And you are turning the soil a little bit, like a quarter turn, but you're not inverting the soil completely like you are with a moldboard. So you're preserving the root zone. I mean, you're disturbing the root zone and cutting into it, but you're still keeping the microbiome covered and incorporated into the top layer of the soil. You're not exposing it. So this is really the implement of choice, and they come in all shapes and sizes for a small tractor or a very large tractor, anything in between. I'm sure most everyone's familiar with this, but I just wanted to say that this is the kind of the standard tool for getting the job done, for incorporating biomass. Here's another picture of a disc. Here's a picture of a chisel plow. Now the advantage of the chisel plow is it does not invert the soil at all, but you're not really incorporating the above ground biomass so much as aerating the soil profile. And this is a really pretty hefty sized chisel plow. I mean, that looks like a good 18 inches of penetration there, maybe even more. I mean, you also see a lot smaller ones that are maybe 12 inches, 6 inches even. What you're trying to do is loosen up the soil and break up the compaction of the soil or break up the hard pan. And this is done it's not done every time you turn your field around. It's done, maybe once a year or every couple of years, depending on the conditions, depending on what's needed. But it's a great tool, and it doesn't disturb the soil ecology so much. So I just wanted you to see that. This is a great tool that we started using in my farming a few years back. After using a disc most of the time, we got a spading machine. A friend of ours, a farming friend of ours, was going out of business, and he sold us his. These are oftentimes most of them are made in Italy. There's a lot of small scale farming that goes on in Italy. They're distributed by companies in the U.S. now. And you can see at the bottom, those are spades. There's 2 skids, and then there's like three or four spades on this machine. They go direct. They penetrate the soil vertically, and they move the soil a little bit, but they do not invert the soil. So it's just like digging by hand. If you've heard of the double digging method, the biodynamic French intensive method of hand digging, which is what I learned originally, which gave me a really good sense of what soil is all about. So, but the thing is with these, they're expensive and they move slowly through the field, but you only really need one pass and you're good to go. You're ready. You've got tilth. But this is the type of thing that I would classify as conservation style tillage. There's a spading machine in the field. You can see it's leaving big clods though. So I'm saying to myself, those clods look too big and too hard, meaning it's probably too wet to be running an implement across that field. And also, it may be that that's a lot of clay. So you have to really think about soil moisture whenever you're doing tractor work. I mean, tractors are great tools, and I can't imagine farming without them. Farming with draft animals. I mean, it's a beautiful idea, and I've seen it happening. I fantasized about being a horse farmer when I was just starting out and everything. But a tractor really makes things efficient, and you can do a lot of work. But as great a tool as they are, they can be a terrible damaging machine, and a lot of times folks don't know how to use them in the right way. They take a lot of finesse. They take a lot of awareness. Sometimes you see a farmer just going back and forth across the field with a disc, and the job is already done, but the guy's still going back and forth, and he's raising a cloud of dust behind him, and he's essentially pulverizing that soil and destroying the structure and destroying the biology and setting the health of the soil back by years from wherever it was at that time. So any implement, you got to really be careful and do it in a really judicious way and be really sensitive. You want to be caressing that ground, not pulverizing and attacking it like this is a weapon. Again, I really need to be there in person and talk to you with a tractor with it in front of us and show you what I mean. But anyway, that's the thing about tillage is it has to be done really cautiously, and the timing has to be impeccable. And oftentimes it's not. And in the big scale industrial world, when you take a big machine out there and go over, hundreds of acres, you can ruin a lot of ground really fast. And if you're using chemicals, you can kind of cover up your mistakes because you're providing this artificial fertility. And so for a while, the loss of the soil structure and the soil biology, you can kind of overcome that with the tools of industrial agriculture. But in the long run, you're just creating more damage. from the organic or regenerative point of view, you've got to really be sensitive to the life of the soil and take care of it, like I said, as you would, your livestock. So here's a no-till approach, and this is a roller crimper. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen a roller crimper in action. Now, again, we're not together. I can't see if you're raising your hand or not, but it's a great idea, but it doesn't always work. Basically, what you're doing here is you're rolling over the standing crop to kill the crop in order to then that becomes, it's dead and it's going to start breaking down. And eventually some of it will make it into the soil, but you're not going to till at all. You're not going to use any type of soil tillage implement. You're just going to lay it down like that, and then it becomes a mulch, and then you need a special seeder to come back over that to put in the next crop. So there are a couple of problems with this. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always kill the crop. Like I would say, if you're just gonna leave the mulch on the field, go ahead and mow it. You're still not disturbing the soil, but you're actually killing the crop, and you're breaking up the plant so that it's going to break down better, and you're going to allow access to the decomposing organisms to get into it and start to digest it and bring it into the soil, right? But the other thing about these things is they're expensive. I mean, all tractor implements are expensive, and tractors, it's all a very expensive proposition. But the roller crimper setup is even more so, from my understanding. Now here's a roller crimper on the front of this tractor with a grain drill on the back. So the guy is knocking down this crop, and at the same time he's pulling a seeder, and so the seeder has discs by each hopper that cut a little tiny furrow into the laying down grass and allow seed to be dropped in there. And my impression is that when it works great, but it doesn't always work out. And it's basically, I'll tell you how no-till started. It started in conventional farming with guys using tons of herbicide, so they could use the herbicide to control the weeds or kill the crop ahead of you, and then come back and seed it, and not have to turn the soil. So they were avoiding tillage, and they felt that was a big plus, which it can be seen that way. But if you're in an organic system where you cannot use herbicide, you don't want to use herbicide, you don't want to be around that stuff, and you don't want to be putting it into the environment, then the no-till deal is a little bit or a lot more tricky. And I'll also add that it's one thing to be doing it when you're growing grain or hay crops, probably. But if you're trying to do vegetables, I don't think it's been mastered yet. I don't think it's been figured out. I've heard of some places. I haven't seen it in person. I don't want to criticize anybody, but I'm a little skeptical. And what I'm trying to say is there are ways to do soil tillage that can still maintain the structure and biology of the soil and the disturbance. There is disturbance, and there's some damage to like, think of those mycorrhizal networks. There's some damage that you're doing. You're cutting those up, but they repair themselves really rapidly, especially in a healthy soil. And the microorganisms, let's remember, microorganisms in the soil, those handfuls of soil that I showed you earlier, there are billions of microorganisms in those handfuls of soil, more than there are people on Earth. And so they're prolific in terms of their reproductive capacity. They're constantly reproducing and dying off, which is how come their biomass is a huge and important part of soil organic matter. So I think we're just coming up on about an hour, and that's kind of the extent of what I wanted to talk about today. And I wanted to just go back to this slide from last time I was with you to just point out. So really, what am I talking about? This is the list of guidelines from Rodale Institute, one of the oldest organic farming educational organizations in the country, if not the world. And we're working closely with Rodale now out here in New Mexico. So the first thing they say is build soil organic matter, and that's what I've been talking about this evening. How do you do that? You do that with cover crops. That is the primary way. Now, I mentioned composting, and we could do a whole webinar on composting. But the thing about composting, if you're going to do it to be able to cover a few acres or a larger farm, you need to make a lot of compost, and that means having a front end loader and other equipment and trucking in large amounts of manure from somewhere and mixing it with hay and other plant materials, and it can be done. I mean, we did it on my farm, and other farmers that I know in California do it. We used to truck in dairy manure and turkey manure from two ranches nearby. But we were lucky enough to be able to get that material. If everybody was doing it, there wouldn't be enough material to go around. That's where, on the next to last spot, integrating livestock is so important. I didn't talk about that tonight. And there's a lot of livestock being raised in the Southwest. I know over in Navajo and in New Mexico in general, there's a lot of livestock, and that livestock is a source of fertility. If you can turn that livestock out onto your fields after you've harvested them and let them graze the stubble or graze the cover crop before you even cut it, they're also leaving their manure behind, and they're also disturbing the soil a little bit with their hoofs, enough to bring a little aeration. That's one of the things about tillage: aeration and drainage to the soil. Bringing that air into the soil root zone is really helpful to all that biology, right? So animal manures are key. Now we have a world where animals are raised, in factory farms, on feedlots. They don't even see the light of day sometimes. They're not out in the soil, and they're not on mixed farms with mixed cropping systems. It's a separate thing, and then the manure just builds up, and it becomes a source of pollution rather than a resource for fertility. So the regenerative idea is to bring that back in, and that's also about enhancing soil or building soil health. Crop rotations I talked about last time, but I was implying it all along here with the different things I was showing you, different types of legumes and grasses and mixed blends of those. And you're rotating those cover crops in between cash crops or in between food crops or in between hay crops, all through the farming cycle, year by year. You're constantly doing crop rotations to add that soil organic matter and to bring that biodiversity. The more diverse plant life you have, the more diverse soil biology you have. The more diverse soil biology you have, the healthier your plants are, the better the fertility, the better the availability of micronutrients, and also the better disease and pest resistance. So, we start to branch out away from soil. Soil is the core and the heart and the foundation of good organic farming, of good farming of any kind. But it also then starts to relate to all the other different factors that make up a really beautiful and healthy and productive agroecosystem. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there, and I don't know if if there's time for questions or comments, but that's all I have for this evening.
Okay, thank you, Tim. for your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to questions if you have some. In the meantime, I do have a question. You know, you're talking about, you know, cover cropping. What, you know, based on our conversation earlier, these producers start off with corn, rotate on to melons, and then also squash, and then they rotate on to alfalfa. And after alfalfa, some rest their fields. What would you suggest would be, you know, the best crop to plant after they plant alfalfa?
Well, so, you know, alfalfa in itself can be considered an excellent cover crop. It's a legume, it's putting nitrogen in. Usually, my understanding is you leave alfalfa for a few years, like 3 years, 5 years. That's true, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that in itself is a great cover crop. And so if you've got an alfalfa field and you're ready to change it out, you know, once you prep that field, and so now you've got to figure out what kind of tillage you want to do to kill that alfalfa and get ready. So the best thing to follow alfalfa with is corn, actually, because corn is one of those plants that really likes nitrogen. It really needs a lot of nitrogen to grow strongly and to grow big and tall and make good ears. I mean, the more nitrogen you have in the soil, the better grain fill you have on your ears of corn, and the higher protein you have in those kernels of corn. So in that case, alfalfa is a great part of the rotation. But in between, when you're not just doing alfalfa, if you have other fields where you're going through rotations, like you might say you might be doing corn, and then you mentioned melons or squash. Well, you might want to think about doing some beans in there, if that's something that you would consider, you know, wanting to harvest for food. You could always put some beans in there to do the same thing, but just for one growing season. Of course, they're an annual, and then you've got nitrogen being added to the soil. But you could also do a blend of things. If you're doing it in the summer and you really want to get a lot of biomass, you could go with something like, you know, cowpeas and sorghum sudax. I didn't bring any. I didn't have any pictures of sudax in this presentation, but you know, like sudax is a great hay crop, or you know, you can just consider it a cover crop because it's so prolific. It grows so much biomass, you know, so much stem and leaf, and that also helps you control your weed populations. If you have weed problems, which most of us do, if you do a really thick planting of either sudax by itself or sudax mixed with cowpea, then you've got the combination of nitrogen and a lot of biomass, you know, from the sudax. Or you could do something like a shorter thing. If you're in between and you know you're going to do a later planting, say you're going to do your corn planted in May, but maybe you could get a quick cover crop in the spring of something like, you know, you could do a combination of like mustard and clover and rye and barley, or things that can handle a little bit of frost and that can handle the chillier weather of the spring. And you know, you get 12 inches of growth on the you know, above the ground, and then you've got that root mass in the ground. So you've added fertility and you've added biological activity to that field, and just do it in a short period of time, and then come in with your main crop, or following that crop. You know, in the fall, you know, you could get depending on, you know, how early your frost date is, you can get some kind of a cover crop in then. The other thing that could be done sometimes, depending on the size of your patches, if it's smaller patches, it might be easier to do. where you do like a polycultural planting. You do a mixed planting. You've got your rows of corn, and then in between them, you could just do beans for picking, or you could do a cover crop of like clover, and then you're feeding nitrogen to the corn as it grows, but you're also feeding the rest of the field. So then, whatever happens next, you've got that extra fertility coming in there. I mean, I know I'm throwing out a lot of things, and the thing I would say is that the main thing is that you really there's no one size fits all thing, and I would really suggest that, and this is what we do in our group. And this is the it's helpful to have a farm advisor to work with, because you really want to make a customized crop rotation plan and think about exactly what works for you and what fits with your goals and your long-term view. What's your 5-year plan, but also what's your 1 to 2 year plan, and what's the evolution of your farm as an agro-ecosystem, and is it a farm business too? Are you trying to make money, or are you mainly growing food for your community and food for people and livestock in your area? All these factors, and also your soils, your microclimate, your elevation. So it's hard to make a general statement about it, but those are just some ideas. But really, what we've done in the past with the farmers we've been working with is, try to find a customized fit for the things that farmer wants to do, and where they're going with their ideas. Does that help at all?
Oh, yes, that does help, and thank you for putting it all into context, and the different options that are out there. I think many of times, depending on the person, it could be a one-sided street, but you've laid out all the options there and the benefits of the different types of crops that are out there and what would work. And, speaking of the different crops that would work in the area, now this year we've been experiencing drought. And, as cover crop, alfalfa requires a lot of water. What is another alternative that, these farmers can plant as cover crops to build their soil up?
So that's the thing these things that I showed you, millet, and I didn't show Sudax, but so millet and Sudax, they're very similar. And, sometimes they look like corn when they're in the field. But those are known to be drought tolerant. So, you can get some good growth for building fertility and for grazable or hayable biomass with those two things. And also the cowpea is drought tolerant. There's another legume called sun hemp. That's SUNN, and second word hemp, which has no relationship to cannabis, by the way. It's just called that for some reason. But it's not smokable or anything like that. And it's not illegal or anything like that. And that's also something that's really good, that's really drought tolerant. Another one is called teff. That's a grass, TEFF, which we're doing trials with. Teff is a really, really tiny, tiny seed, like even smaller than onion seed or smaller than broccoli seed. But it actually is really drought tolerant and really livestock friendly. And it actually is a grain to eat too. But I mean, we're not growing it for the grain part, but that would take a combine and a whole different approach to get the grain harvested. And there are other things that we're looking at, that we're going to be looking at. This is our first year of this drought tolerant cover crop project. And we're going to be looking at other ones. And it's interesting for me to hear you talk about the need for that, because that's what we're hearing from other people in other areas too. So that makes us feel like we're on the right track to try to figure these things out. And so that's something that we're going to be learning more about, and hopefully we can share with the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project as we go along.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have so many other questions, but I know we're pushed against time, and thank you everyone for, hanging on, staying on with us. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude our Q&A session, and thank you again, Tim, for your great presentation on soil enhancement. And if you missed the beginning of it, it is being recorded, and we will have it posted onto our YouTube channel and then also on our Facebook page. So again, thank you, Tim, for your presentation, and we will be in touch and go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and
thank you very much.
thank you. So I'm going to share the next few slides to conclude our webinar this evening. I encourage you guys all to go onto visit our website page, nsa.nmsu.edu. And then on there, we do have a listing of our programming, our conservation planning programs. We also have our upcoming events, and the PowerPoint slides are shared on there under the webinars and workshops section. And then we also have newsletters that we disperse monthly. So go ahead and go check out our page and explore some of who we are and what we do. As I mentioned, we do have a conservation planning program, and if you are in need of a conservation plan, whether you're a farmer or a rancher, and if you need assistance in writing out a basic conservation plan, we're here to help. We do have 4 technical technicians. They are resource technicians. They are located both in Eastern and Navajo Agency. Send us an email if you would like more information or if you would like assistance. Okay, so, and visit our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, subscribe to our monthly newsletter, and learn more about livestock and horticulture topics. I am Jessie Jim, and I am the project coordinator for the NSA project. We do have our project specialist, Kelly Lantana, who we miss dearly. She's off this week. She's usually the person that handles all of the webinars. And then our resource technicians, we have Shirley Tolth, who is located in both Eastern and Northern. She assists the producers in both agencies. We have Kyle Jim, who is located in Northern Agency. And then we have Nicole Pino, our recent hire, who covers Eastern Agency, and Shailene Paul, who covers Eastern Agency as well down in Rama. So visit our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and subscribe to our monthly newsletter. There's our email if you have further questions. With that, thank you all and have a good evening. The Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project is a New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service initiative delivered in collaboration with the Neck College Land Grant Office and Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment, also known as COPE. Our project is funded by the USDA's Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. We do have 3 goals that we are aiming to help farmers and ranchers. The first one is to improve the operations and profitability and sustainability of socially disadvantaged Navajo farmers and ranchers. That's our first goal. And how we accomplish that is through webinars such as this evening and in-person workshops, as well as one-on-one technical assistance with farmers and ranchers. Our second goal is to increase our farmers and ranchers' knowledge and use of USDA programs such as NRCS, FSA, rural development, and risk management programs, and other services and those of other resource providers. And lastly, we are increasing the local production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy food by Navajo families and individuals through our gardening programs that we provide directly to backyard gardeners, farmers, and then also our school programs. So those are our 3 goals and what we've been doing for the past 2 years, and looking forward to working with both farmers and ranchers in the future.